death penalty has been a controversial issue for decades. Some believe that it's a just form of punishment that should be used in the United States. But we must remember to consider the innocent people who are sentenced to death along with the guilty. According to Oxford Languages, the definition of the death penalty is the punishment of execution administered to someone legally convicted of a capital crime. Since 1976, when capital punishment was reestablished in the United States, 185 people who have been sentenced to death have been exonerated, and 1,532 people have been executed. Were every single one of those people guilty? According to the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the rate of such figures is often described as a dark figure, an important measure of the criminal justice system that is not merely unknown but the unknowable. We cannot begin to account for the number of people who were found guilty of crimes they were innocent for and paid the ultimate price for it. That is why we must take a hard look at our justice system and ask ourselves, are we sure enough in our current system to leave the lives of innocent people to chance? Claude Jones was convicted of a liquor store shooting in 1989 because of a strand of hair that was supposedly his was found at the scene. After spending 11 years on death row, in 2000, the day before his execution, Jones asked for a stay of execution and another analysis of the strand of hair. He was denied both and executed the next day. After multiple innocence organizations requested the testing of the hair in 2010, the hair was tested and it was not Claude Jones's, it was the victim's hair. Barry Shuck, co-founder of the Innocence Project, said, "The DNA results prove that the testimony about the hair sample on which this entire case rests on was just wrong. Unreliable forensic science and a completely inadequate post-conviction process cost Claude Jones his life." There was no other physical evidence to indicate that Claude Jones had any role in the murder of the liquor store owner. Yet he was executed without so much as a chance to prove his innocence. Did an innocent man die that day? A main reason for the large number of innocent people on death row in the first place is police misconduct. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, nearly 70% of exonerations involved misconduct by police, prosecutors, and other government officials. Damon Thibodeau spent 15 years on death row before being cleared through DNA by the Innocence Project, and stated that the threat of the death penalty is part of the reason that he falsely confessed in the first place. A Texas man named Ruben Cantu was charged for capital murder when he was just 17 years old for an attempted robbery. A key eyewitness in the case and Cantu's co-defendant have both now claimed that he was innocent, the eyewitness stating that he only identified Cantu as the shooter because of the pressure authorities put on him. This is a sad truth for many, as false identifications and confessions, both from the defendant themselves and by others, are a common occurrence in exonerated death row convictions, especially when they are threatened and interrogated for hours on end. Some have lived to tell the tale of the pressures authorities put on them, but others are executed before they are able to tell their story. There is also a racial bias between death row convictions. According to the ACLU, from 1995 to 2000, 80% of all federal capital cases recommended by the U.S. attorneys to the Attorney General seeking the death penalty are people of color. They also explain that 16 of the 18 prisoners currently on death row are either Black, Hispanic, or Asian. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, a new examination of exonerations involving DNA evidence suggests that many more innocence cases remain undetected because DNA evidence was unavailable or courts refused to permit testing. So many have remained on death row for long periods of time and possibly never left with their lives because of the misuse, contamination, destruction, or incorrect analysis of evidence. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, the data now shows for every 8.3 people who have been put to death in the U.S. since executions resumed in the 1970s, one person who had been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death has been exonerated. In addition, the National Academy of Sciences explains that 4.1% of people currently on death row are likely to be innocent. Going back to what we've established, 185 people who have been exonerated since the death penalty resumed in 1976. But there are so many people who have been executed that may be innocent. I'm not saying that all or any of these people are 100% innocent or guilty, but that's my point. There's doubt within every single one of these cases, and in some, extreme evidence to the contrary, yet they died for crimes they possibly didn't commit. Joseph Odell, a man convicted of murder, asked the state to conduct DNA tests on other pieces of evidence to demonstrate his innocence but was refused, and was executed about a year later. Cameron Todd Willingham was convicted of killing his 3 children in a fire in 1992. The only scientific evidence was the supposed use of fire accelerants in the children's room and hallway. Before Willingham's execution, arson expert Gerald Hurst was hired by his attorney to investigate the crime, and after his review he stated, "There is nothing to suggest to any reasonable arson investigator that this was a fire. arson fire. It was just a fire. After presenting this to the board, they still made a unanimous decision for him to still receive the death penalty. He was executed in 2004. In a further investigation after Willingham's death, 4 fire experts hired by the Innocence Project and 3 hired by the Chicago Tribune have all stated that there is no reason that we should believe that this fire was set intentionally, and the first investigation was scientifically invalid. The innocence of those on the death penalty isn't an occurrence of the past. It still happens to this day. Carlton Michael Gary was convicted of 3 murders. After further investigation, they discovered there was a mold of a bite mark on the victim, and when compared to his bite mark, they did not match. The shoe prints around the scene were a size 10, while Gary was a size 13.5, and the only other piece of evidence was contaminated and unable to be tested again. The police then stated that Gary had confessed, although Gary denied it and it was never recorded or documented. After his request for clemency, the act of requesting a relief in sentencing, he was denied and executed in 2018. Walter Barton was convicted in 1993 after being accused of killing an 81-year-old woman. The prosecution said that the blood stains on his clothes were impact stains from high-velocity blood spatter, although he always stuck to his claim that he got the blood on his clothes when he pulled her granddaughter away from the scene after finding her body with a neighbor. In a 2015 analysis by crime scene analyst Lawrence Renner, he established that the stains on Barton's clothes were transfer stains, and after these revelations, 3 jury members signed affidavits stating that this would have affected their guilt stage deliberations. Walter Barton was executed in 2020. When discussing the possible innocence of a man named Larry Griffin, who was executed in 1995 for the murder of Quinton Moss, the New York Times stated, "One of the reasons we have not had a definitive example of the execution of an innocent person is that official investigations cease once the death penalty has been carried out. The Death Penalty Information Center lists 20 cases in which there was reasonable doubt because of general misinformation, prosecutory and police misconduct, and false or suspicious forensic evidence. All 20 of these men were executed, and it makes you think, how many of them were innocent? If they were able to have additional DNA testing, retrials, and stays of execution, would their fates have turned out differently?" According to the Innocence Project, they have gotten 18 people exonerated through the use of DNA testing, and as a collective group, they have spent 202 years in prison. Ron Williamson and Daniel Fritz spent 10 and 11 years, respectively, on Oklahoma's death row before DNA testing proved their innocence. A man in Oklahoma, Curtis McCarty, spent 21 years in prison, 18 of those years being on death row, because of forensic misconduct before being released based on DNA evidence in 2007. Frank Lee Smith died of cancer on death row and served 14 years in prison for a murder he did not commit, and was proven innocent 11 months after his death through DNA testing. What we can truly learn from this is that the American justice system is made of humans, and humans make mistakes and humans fail. That is why we cannot depend on our system to sort out the guilty from the innocent, and we cannot leave those innocent lives at the mercy of this system. No one makes an effort to reconsider convictions, no matter how much evidence there is to the contrary. So many have requested DNA testing, stays of execution for further investigation of their supposed crimes, and retrials, and so many have been denied. How many of those people would have gotten different results in those trials? How many would have been exonerated? How many would still be alive today? We will never know because no one cared. No one cared about whether the prosecutor were guilty, and each and every one of those people died because of it. The names you heard in this speech are a small fraction of the amount of people wronged by the death penalty. We not only need to reevaluate the way our justice system operates, we need to rid America of capital punishment. We must come to the realization that the abolishment of the death penalty isn't just for the guilty, that it's for the innocent. Thank you.